In this video, we are going to complete this exercise about promises, and we will be using things like resolve, reject, .then, .catch, finally, etc. So let's start with the first one. Here it says, create a promise, have it resolved with a value promise resolved. In resolve after a delay of 1000 milliseconds using setTimeout. Print the contents of the promise after it has been resolved by passing console.log to .then. So here we need to first create a promise. So we'll say new promise. Promise accepts one callback function, and that callback function gets access to two other functions, and that we can name resolve and reject. And here we need to resolve the promise after 1000 milliseconds using setTimeout. So we are going to call setTimeout, and setTimeout accepts the first parameter, that is callback, and second is 1000 milliseconds. So here we'll put a callback and we'll pass a second parameter that is going to be 1000 milliseconds. And here we need to resolve the promise by calling the function resolve. And when we are resolving, we have to pass this message that is promise resolved. So this is how you create a promise. You can store it in a variable and you can call it promise. Now, promise is a placeholder object that can either resolve or reject. Here we are resolving it with a value of promise resolved. So what we can do here is we can use a .then function on it. And that is what we need to do, because whatever value this promise is resolved with, we'll get access to that by using .then. So here we will get access to the value. We can call it message, and we can just say console.log message. Now one more thing we can do here. What we are doing is, here we are passing a callback function or a function reference that is getting access to message, and we are just passing that to console log. So why not just remove this, and here instead of we passing it, .then will pass the same thing. Because this is a function reference, it will be called with a value, and console log can accept n number of parameters. So it will work in the same way. Similarly, let's go ahead and do the similar things with a second problem. So here it says create another promise. Now have it reject with the value of promise rejected without using setTimeout. Print the content of the promise after it has been rejected by passing console log to catch. So we are going to do a similar thing. The only thing is here we don't have to use setTimeout, and instead of resolve, we'll call reject. And when we are rejecting, we have to pass a message rejected promise. Now instead of .then, we're just going to call .catch. And it is going to do the same thing. That is console.log. Let's move on to the next one, that is create another promise. Now have it rejected with the value of rejected promise without using setTimeout. Print the content of the promise after it has been rejected by passing it to console.log to catch, and also use finally to log the message promise is settled. So we know that a promise can only be in two states, pending or settled. Settled means either it is rejected or it is resolved. So here we are going to do a similar thing that we did earlier, that is to create something like this. So I'll just copy it from here and paste it here. So we have a promise that is rejected, and we are saying .catch, going to .catch, pass the message that you're getting to console log, will get the log message, and then we can use finally, and here we just need to log a message saying promise settled. So we'll use console log and pass the message promise settled here. Moving on to next, what will be the output of the code below? So here, the first thing it is saying is console log. So whenever I look at code snippets like this, I always try to create a sequence in my mind, thinking which code is synchronous in nature and which one is asynchronous in nature. So this one is synchronous, asynchronous, it is promise. So it is asynchronous because promises are always asynchronous. So there are two synchronous code. So the output is going to be A, and after that it is going to be D, because all the synchronous code will get executed first. Now we have two asynchronous lines. So we have setTimeout and we have promises. We know that setTimeout gets resolved in web browser API and it waits in callback queue. And we know that promise doesn't wait in callback queue. So this one I can just write it callback queue, and here I can write it is a microtask queue, as we can see it here. So this one is in callback queue, this one is in microtask queue. But we know an important thing about event loop, they prioritize microtask queue over callback queue. So because this is in priority, even if it is waiting in callback queue, this one will get resolved. Why? Because if you look at these two things, this set timeout is completed at 0 second and this promise is resolved at the same time. Because there is no difference, the output is going to be promise first, so the output will be C and here it will be B. If there was some difference in time of set timeout or resolve, that would have been a different case. So in that way, the output will be A, D, C and B. The first will be A and D. Why? Because these two lines are synchronous in nature. Third will be C because it is promise and it waits in microtask queue. And last will be B because it is waiting in callback queue. Moving on to next. The next says write a function called wait that accepts time in millisecond and executes the function after given time. So we'll write the function here. Moving on to next is write a function wait that accepts time in millisecond and returns a promise. The promise gets resolved after given time. So what we need to do is we'll go ahead, write a function wait that accepts time and returns a promise. So to create a promise, we'll say promise. It accepts a callback function and will get access to resolve and reject. We have to resolve the callback function after given time. So we will be using setTimeout. setTimeout accepts a callback function. So here we are going to say resolve after the given time. So we'll be like time and here we can just resolve with any message. And here we can say promise resolved. So that's all. If you use this function, it will be used something like this. Wait. And I want this promise to wait for 1000 milliseconds. And then we can say dot then. And here we can get access to the message and we can say console log. In short, we can just say console.log. So after writing the function, we can go ahead and test it. So we'll open our console, press enter, and here we can see that after 1000 milliseconds, we saw the message promise resolved. If we want to wait for more than 1 second, we can also do that. So we'll say 2 seconds and log the message. So after 2 seconds, we'll see the message promise resolved. So this wait function will be used whenever you want to wait for something to happen and then do something else. So you can create a function like this. So let's move on to the next one. So here it says do the following, create a new promise. So we'll start working on it here. So we'll create a new promise, we'll call it promise. To do that, we'll say new promise. We'll get access to resolve and reject. And here it says you have to resolve it with a value of 21. So let's resolve it. Now it says use dot then. So we'll use dot then. And here return adding 10 to the value that you will get as parameter. So here we'll get access to value. And what we need to return it with, we'll say value plus 10. Similarly, we are going to do the same thing here. For the next line, it says return by adding 100. So we'll add value plus 100. Now it is saying like check if the value you get is greater than 100, then you have to throw error. So we are going to say dot then. We are going to get access to next value. And here we are going to check a condition by saying if value is greater than 100. If that is the case, you have to throw new error. So we'll say throw new error with a message that can be something went wrong. And then it is asking us to handle error by using catch. So we'll say catch, we'll get access to error, and here we'll say console log. So in short, we can just say console log. Now we can save it, we can copy it from here and test it in our browser. We'll press enter and here we can see it says something went wrong. If you want to test the value also, you can write console log in all these different conditions. So here we were returning it directly, but here we can say return now. Similarly, because we are not doing inline return, we'll have to write the word return here. And in both these cases, what we can do is we can say console.log value. So we will be able to see the value at multiple places. The same thing we can do it here, copy it, we'll save this file, copy it from here, clear it, paste it, and here you can see the first value is 21, then 31, then 131, and because this value is greater than 100, it is throwing new error, and because you are throwing new error, it will be caught by catch. Moving on to next, we have do the following. Create a promise. So it is going to be similar to this. So I'm just going to copy this from here and we'll paste it here. The first thing it says is create a new promise. And this time we have to resolve it with an array. So we'll resolve it like this. And then it says use dot then and concat b into the parameter and return. So here we'll use dot then, we'll get access to value, we are going to log the value, and what we are going to return? We are going to concatenate it and return that. So we'll say value dot concat with a value of p. So we are done with second one. Now third one says that use dot then and return an object like this. So here we'll get access to value, we are logging that, and here instead of returning it like this, we need to return an object, and we have access to an array. So what we can do, we can use reduce, right? Because if you have an array and you want an object, you can just use reduce. So here we can say value, because we know value is going to be an array. We'll say reduce, it will give us access to accumulator and current value. The initial value is going to be an object, and here we are going to write our code. First thing we always do is to return accumulator. So here what do we need is, from this array the index will become key and the value will become the value. So here we'll also need access to index. So we'll say go ahead, add the index as key, and the value is going to be current value. We'll save it and return this. At last what we need to do, use dot then and log the value. So here after doing this, we are going to just get access to value, we are going to log it, that's all. So we're going to remove this part from here, remove catch, and we'll copy this file from here and we'll see if it is working or not. So clear it out, paste it, press enter. Here we see the first value is a, then we have an array of a and b, then we have an object, and that is where it ends. So in this example, what it is trying to say is you can just return any kind of value that you want. So here I'm returning an array. I'm adding something in that array. Again, I'm just returning an object. So that is what it means here. Let's move on to the next one, and it says do the following, create a new promise first. So it is again going to be a similar thing. So I'm just going to copy it from here, paste it here. We have a promise named first. So I'm going to create that. It is going to be resolved with a value 1. So let's just resolve it with 1. And here it says use dot then on first. So we have to use dot then on first. So what we can do is we can just break it also like this. So here instead of just saying dot then directly, you can say first dot then. So first dot then and return 2. Also check the value you get access to by logging. So here I'm getting access to the value, I'm going to log it, and then what we have to return? We have to return 2 from here. So we're going to return 2 from here. Similarly, so the next one we have to return 3 and 4. So I'm just going to copy this from here, paste it 2 times and return it with 3 and 4. We are going to delete the other parts from here, save it, copy these things from here and paste it in our browser. So we'll paste it, press enter, and we can see 1, 2, 3, and the last thing is going to be a promise that is fulfilled with a value of 4 because we are returning 4 here. So here what we are doing is we are creating a promise and we are doing chaining. Chaining means one promise after another. So here we are having 1, next, third, so one after another, that is what it is. Let's move on to the next one. So I'm just going to copy this from here and move to the next one. So here It says that create a promise called first and resolve it with a value of 1. That is exactly what we are doing. Now it is saying use dot then on first. So that is what we are doing here. Dot then on first, log the value and return 2 here. So we are returning 2 and done. The next line is saying that use dot then on first. Again it is asking me to do that. So if you look at the previous question, it is saying use dot then on first, but here it is saying chain dot then on above. So whatever is being returned from here, you have to chain dot then on that, but here that is not the case. So here what we have to do is we have to do this similar thing again and again. So we'll delete this code from here. And what we have to do, we have to create a promise, use dot then on first, use dot then on first again, and use dot then on first again. But the value is changing to 3 and here the value is changing to 4. Now when you go ahead, take a look at this code and paste it here, you will see the value is 1, 1, 1. But this got resolved with 4. So here it's saying try to understand the difference between problem 8 and problem 9. Write your observation. So let us try to understand what is going on here. So we'll take a look at the first one here. So we are creating a promise. So we'll just create a box here. We'll say this one is a promise. And we are resolving this promise with a value of 1. So we'll just create an arrow here. And here in the middle, we can write that we are resolving this with 1. So whenever it is resolved, then we are going to use dot then on it. So we are going to use dot then. So we'll create a box here again. And we have to use dot then here. And again, if you take a look at it, we are resolving that again. So if you take a look at it, resolving here means whatever value returned from dot then is what this promise will be resolved to, and the next one will get access to. So whatever you return from the previous promise is the same value that you will get into the next. And that is what is happening here. We are using dot then, and then here we are resolving it with 1 by using resolve. But here whenever you return something, it does the similar thing. You are returning what from here? You are returning 2 from here. Then in the similar case, you are using dot then again. So it is going to be something like this. So here we are resolving it with 3, and the next one we are doing it with 4. But we are not doing anything after that. So this is what the promise looks like, and this is what is chaining. Like you have a promise on that promise you use dot then, and from there you return a value. That value is what that promise is getting resolved with, and this dot then will get access to. So this is what is happening in problem number 8, that is known as chaining. But if you take a look at this, what is happening here is it is going to have a similar promise like this. The name of the promise is going to be first. It is going to be resolved with 1. So this is the promise. Now what you're doing, you're calling dot then on first. So this is your first thing. So I'll go ahead and call it the first time. So this is when you're calling it. So dot then is called here. So I'll just copy this thing from here. We'll paste it here. So dot then got called. Again what you're doing is you're calling dot then again. So if you take a look at the code, you'll understand that here you're calling dot then on first. Here you're calling on it again. Here you're calling on it again. So you're calling on it in parallel. So here you're resolving it with 2. Here you're resolving it with 3. And you're doing it again. So I'll just copy and paste it here. And it is going to have dot then in this way. So if you take a look at this, so here what we are doing is we have one promise and we have 3 handler on top of it. So this dot then is on first, this dot then is also on first, and this dot then is also on first. So one promise, multiple handler. Here one promise, one handler that returns another promise, again one handler that returns another promise. So this is known as chaining, and this is using multiple handler on the same promise. In real world application, this is what you're going to use 99.9% of time This is something that is not very useful, but it's really good to understand the difference between them. So in that way, we are done with this question, and you can write your observation here by creating a diagram or something. And we'll move on to the last one. And this one says that create a promise. And to create a promise, we use new promise. We need to pass a callback function. We get access to resolve. And here we are resolving it with a value John. So we are done with this line. Now use dot then and return another promise that resolves with aria. So here we are resolving with John. Now we'll use dot then, we'll get access to value, and here what we need to do, return another promise that resolves to aria. So here we just need to return promise. So I'm going to resolve this promise at the same time. So I'm just going to use promise.resolve. You can do very similar thing that we are doing it here. But I'm just trying to use multiple ways of doing the similar thing so you know that you can do that. So here you can say promise.resolve. I want to resolve it with a value aria. Now try to understand what is happening here. We have one promise. We are using dot then on it. From that promise, we are returning another promise. Now, what it is saying, use dot then to log the value. So here we'll use dot then. We'll get access to value. And here we'll say console dot log value. And what we have to do next is return another promise that resolves after 1000 milliseconds. So now we cannot use promise.resolve because the promise is not getting resolved at the same time. So here we just need to return new promise. We'll get access to callback. Here we'll get access to resolve. And here we can say set timeout. We have to call resolve with a value of bran, and that too after 1000 milliseconds. So this is what we have to do. Now what we are going to do for experiment is use another dot then. We'll get access to value and we'll just say console log. So in short, we can just say console log just to see what happens to this value and when this value gets resolved. So I'll just add the instruction use. I'm also changing the time to 2000 milliseconds. That will give us a bit of extra second to understand what is going on. So I'll copy this from here, go on to our console and paste the code. Press enter. Here we see aria. Then we see bran, and the bran comes after 2000 milliseconds. So look at this, what is happening here. The first promise gets resolved with the value of John. We are not logging that value, and that's why we cannot see John here. So let us try to understand what is going on here. So here we have a promise. This promise is resolving with a value of John. We are using dot then to chain whatever is coming from here. So we get access to that value, and what we are returning from this promise is another promise. So what happens in this case is whenever you're returning a promise from here, this next dot then will wait for this promise that you're returning from here to be resolved. But because we are resolving it at the same time, so actually it will not wait because we are saying promise.resolve. So creating a promise and resolving at the same time. So until this promise is resolved, this dot then will wait for it. And that is what we can see it here. So we have console log of value. Then what we are doing, we are returning a promise again from this dot then. And because we are returning another promise, this dot then will wait for this promise to be resolved. That is going to be resolved after 2000 milliseconds. Once the previous promise is resolved, then only this dot then will be called. So if you want to take a look, let's just execute it again. What we will see is, we'll see aria after 2000 milliseconds, this promise will be resolved, and only after that, this dot then will be called. So this is an interesting paradigm to understand what is happening here. You have a promise, return a value from it. Because the value is resolved at the same time, dot then will be executed. But at certain situation, if you are returning a promise and that is taking some extra time to resolve, dot then will wait for it to be resolved, and only after that it will be called. So in that way, we completed this exercise. But we got to learn so much from this exercise, right? We got to understand what is promises, what is promise chain, and using multiple handler on the same promise. That is what we saw. We also saw something about microtask queue, callback queue. We wrote our wait function, and here we had multiple conditions to take care of. So in this way, we completed this exercise.